today is, and it's been the same for weeks now, is be priority driven. And so all of our thoughts basically come from Matthew in the New Testament, chapter 22, verse 37 to 39, which says, Jesus says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. That's the first and greatest commandment. The second commandment is like unto it, you love your neighbor as you love yourself. And so we've been looking now at what we call the third priority, and that is your neighbor, and saying that our primary neighbor, if I am a follower of Jesus, is my relationship with other believers. So we talked about that for a few weeks. In the last few weeks, we've been talking about the role of the husband in a family, the role of a wife in a family, and now we're going to talk about the kids' role in the family. Well, my family was rather interesting. I grew up in a home where my mom and dad were divorced when I was about 2 years old. I don't recall or remember anything about my real father. I have a picture of him. And after that divorce occurred, my mom and I went to live with her parents and for a number of years. And I never saw or met, as the years went by, my real father. When I was about 8, a stepfather came into my life. And I guess he did the best he could do, but he was not plugged in his faith. His upbringing had been rather difficult, the kind of father particularly that he had, and he really didn't know how to be a daddy. So I didn't have his involvement in my life, in my growing up years before I left home. So that's a little bit of my background. And so, when you don't have that father involved in your life, it can leave a hole in your heart. And we'll talk more about that in a couple weeks. So today, I want to talk about the role of a kid in the family. Sometimes we talk and think only about the role of the mom and dad, but there's a role for the kid. And we're going to be very pointed and precise here as we talk about this. But let me just give you a couple overall points to begin with. Number one, children learn how to grow up by watching their parents, their mom and dad, how to be a future mom or dad, how to be a future husband or wife. That is supposed to be the model in the home, even though there's no model in the home that are perfect, ought to be progressing and developing and growing. But the role of the home and the influence of a home is to be powerful. The second thing, a child's self-esteem, we are told by experts, is basically set in a child's heart and mind by the time they're around 5 years old. So if that child is growing up in a home that's unhealthy, or if the mom and dad don't have a good grip on their faith, or a good grip on their own personal significance and self-esteem, that is going to spill over and impact the children. So with that said, let's go to a passage of scripture in Ephesians in the New Testament, chapter number 6, and I want to read the first 3 verses. Children, kids, obey your parents. This is the right thing to do because God has placed them in authority over you. So what he's saying here is God has given you parents, and your parents are to be respected. They are to play their role, and that means to oversee you, to direct you, to love you, and to help you grow up. And it says here, and he said, this is the right thing to do, which means there is a natural law, just in any structure of society, it is a natural and wise thing to do for the parents to be in charge with loving, tender, but firm leadership, and for the children to come under that and to be motivated by, cared for by, and adhere to and obey their mom and dad. So that's the first thing it says. Honor them because that is the right thing to do. Then it goes on, it says, this is the first of God's 10 commandments that ends with a promise. So if you go back to Exodus chapter number 20, where the 10 commandments are given, and if you go to verse 12, it says, honor your father and mother, that you may have a long, good life in the land that the Lord your God will give you. And so it's giving us a key thing here. Not only is it the right thing to do, a natural law, but it's also a divine law. God set it up this way. Listen, God makes no mistakes. We make mistakes. God's never made one. He knows how the family ought to best operate and run. And yet we often act as though we know more than He does. We know how this thing ought to run. This is what I'm going to do. This is how I'm going to operate this deal. It never works. It never works. So, and by the way, He says, this is the command, the only command with a promise. So, then He goes on and says, and this promise is that if you honor your father and mother, yours, and here it is, and if you don't honor your father and mother, the opposite of what I'm getting ready to read is true. And this is the promise that if you honor your father and mother, yours will be a long life, there will be health, there will be a lot of blessings and terms of longevity of life, etc. And then second, it says your life will be full of blessing. You will prosper. That doesn't mean you're going to be a zillionaire. It could mean that you have a wholesome, well-balanced life. When you raise your own family, if God blesses you with that, your children will grow to be strong, etc., under your loving and caring leadership. This is a big, big deal. And you know, to me, and I could go on and on about this, there's so much more to say, but to me, what breaks my heart is when I see children, and sometimes even grown children, calling their father old man, or the mother, the old woman. So disrespectful. And let me tell you something. When we step out of bounds, as if you're still a young adult and you don't have right relationships with your parents, you need to get it right. You say, but what if they're not respectable? So you're not going to respect them, and they're not respectable. So it's two different entities coming together, and the common denominator is disrespect. Man, that's not the way to go. Listen, don't worry about them. You worry about doing what's right. That's what you're responsible for. So as you raise your children, raise them to love you and respect you. If they're grown, pray that somehow, some way, if they're not thinking of you, if they're not being respectful to you, then pray that somehow God will change their heart. Because in the long run, they're going to be hurt. In the long run, they're going to be hurt by not respecting and honoring you and mom and dad, as mom and dad. So that's about it.